Crooked Swamp Cave Incident. On March 27, 1982, Sergeant Donald Wellner prepared for a routine Boy Scout expedition in New Jersey. At 48 years old, Wellner was a 22-year veteran of the New Jersey State Police. He was an experienced spelunker who had explored dozens of cave systems. Today, he was taking 12 Boy Scouts, including his 2 sons, into Crooked Swamp Cave. Another scoutmaster named Jim Ewing was along to help supervise the group. The expedition was going well as they made their way through the known passages. At some point, Wellner noticed an uncharted passage in the cave system. Passage roughly 18 by 20 inches wide. It was tight but seemingly navigable for an experienced spelunker like him. Wellner decided to crawl into this uncharted passage to see where it led. What Wellner couldn't know was that this passage contained a deadly trap. He squeezed into the crevice, which angled slightly downward, requiring stomach crawling. This type of crawl is called a squeeze and is very dangerous. Wellner pushed deeper until his forward progress stopped by a large limestone boulder. The boulder sat wedged in the narrow crevice, blocking the way ahead. He pushed against the rock, and the boulder moved, but not in the expected way. Wellner could move forward slightly, but when he tried backing out, the boulder pressed tighter. Wellner was now 17 feet underground in a space so tight he could barely breathe. What made the situation worse was that the pressure was causing him to bleed. Either a rock struck his head or constant pressure caused the trauma. Wellner was losing blood in a position where he couldn't stop the bleeding. Wellner's 2 sons and Jim Ewing tried desperately to rescue him themselves. They tried pulling on his legs and manipulating rocks around him, but any pulling from behind only made the stone press tighter against him. For several hours they worked before finally leaving to get help. When rescue workers arrived, they realized they faced an extremely difficult operation. They couldn't simply pull him out the way he had entered the passage. At one point, Wellner asked rescue workers to tell his wife he would be late. But as hours passed, Wellner's condition deteriorated from multiple factors. Blood loss, cold temperature, and stress were taking their toll on his body. At 2 a.m. on a Sunday morning, rescuers heard his last communication. Grunts, then silence. By Monday morning, they could detect no vital signs from Wellner below. But rescue workers never stopped trying to free him from the trap. For 80 hours straight, they worked for 3.5 days continuously. On Tuesday night late, they finally broke through to reach him, but Donald Wellner was officially pronounced dead 20 minutes before being freed. He had actually been dead since sometime Sunday, roughly 2.5 days. When they pulled his body free, blood could be seen on the limestone boulder. Wellner had lost significant blood, which accounted for his rapid decline. Parker's Pit Cave Incident. On January 25, 1986, 4 cave explorers entered Parker's Pit Cave. Their first major obstacle was a vertical drop of 22 feet requiring rappelling. 2 of them successfully descended using proper technique. The third person began his descent, but made a critical error rigging his equipment. He was using a carabiner brake bar device to control his descent. However, he neglected to thread the rope. This meant his brake bar was useless, providing no control. As he stepped off the edge, the equipment immediately failed. His body struck the limestone floor from 22 feet up. The others rushed toward him, expecting to find him dead. The fallen explorer was conscious and moving, somehow surviving the fall. He struggled to his feet, shaken but apparently uninjured. However, the group chose to continue deeper into the cave instead. They descended deeper where passages became more technical and dangerous. The cave's most notorious feature awaited them, the Z-bend passage. This is a series of tight spaces barely large enough for humans. The first person entered feet first on his belly, warning how tight it was. The second person followed feet first but lying on his back. When he entered the Z-bend, the limestone walls gripped his body. With each movement, the rock tightened, compressing his chest. At the first sharp turn, he realized he was trapped. He could neither move forward nor backward through the passage. His situation became life-threatening as breathing became difficult. The Z-bend compressed his chest, making each breath a struggle. The others could hear him cry for help from inside. Time was running out to extract him from the deadly Z-bend. One positioned himself behind while another worked from ahead. Inch by agonizing inch, they worked him through the passage. His body slipped through just as his endurance reached its limit. The successful extraction marked the end of the nightmare expedition. The group retreated, climbing back up to the surface. Ottawa River Cave Incident. On July 19, 1988, experienced cave divers John Lamari and Luc LeBlanc explored underwater caves near the Ottawa River. They were part of a 2-week cave diving camp organized by the Speleological Society of Quebec. John Lamari was 37 years old and known as a methodical, safety-conscious diver. The 2 divers approached a spring that looked like a simple surface pool, but beneath the innocent-looking water lay a complex underwater cave system. They entered the water and began their descent into the flooded passage. The underwater tunnel was about 6.5 feet high and 16 feet wide. The maximum depth reached about 20 feet below the surface. Emergency ascent to the surface was impossible due to the rock rock ceiling above. They swam into the cave system, laying guideline rope as they progressed. This thin rope would be their lifeline back to the surface. The guideline was their only navigation aid in the dark underwater environment. At 295 feet into the cave system, they reached their predetermined turnaround point. Experienced cave divers follow strict air consumption rules for safety. They never use more than 1/3 of their air supply going in. This leaves 1/3 for the return trip and 1/3 for emergencies. Lamoury discovered a minor leak in one of his regulators. The two divers returned to the surface where Lamoury cleaned his equipment. After ensuring his gear worked properly, they re-entered the cave. This second dive was supposed to be routine and safe. At the end of their guideline, Lamoury signaled to begin their exit. LeBlanc experienced a minor entanglement with the guideline. It took him only moments to sort out the small problem, but when he looked around in the murky water, he couldn't see Lamoury. Visibility was poor and sediment reduced their visual range to just a few feet. Assuming Lamoury had gone ahead as planned, LeBlanc followed the guideline out. The return journey felt normal with no reason to suspect anything wrong. When LeBlanc surfaced in the entrance pool, he found himself completely alone. Lamoury should have been there waiting and discussing the dive. Every cave diver's worst nightmare was beginning to unfold. Without hesitation, LeBlanc re-entered the cave to search for his partner. He followed the guideline back through 295 feet of underwater passage. The return journey felt like hours as LeBlanc fought growing panic. At the end of their survey line, LeBlanc made a horrifying discovery. John Lamoury was floating motionless in the water, clearly dead. His regulator was no longer in his mouth, but his mask remained on. Most disturbing was the blood visible on Lamoury's diving mask. This wasn't equipment failure or navigation error, but a medical emergency. LeBlanc's air supply was running dangerously low after the extended search. He was 295 feet from the surface with a deceased partner. Cave diving protocol demanded he save himself rather than risk a second death. He managed to move Lamoury's body partway toward the entrance, but his air supply forced him to make the agonizing decision to leave his partner. The swim back alone, abandoning Lamoury in the darkness, traumatized LeBlanc forever. Professional recovery divers returned the next day with specialized equipment. Their investigation revealed Lamoury's equipment was functioning perfectly. His air tank still contained breathable air and showed no equipment failure. There were no signs of entanglement or navigation errors. The blood on his mask suggested he suffered a severe nosebleed. This may have caused suffocation when combined with losing his regulator. Alternatively, he might have experienced a sudden heart problem or aneurysm. What made Lamoury's death so terrifying was its complete randomness. Sharp's Cave incident. On a warm summer afternoon, 40-year-old Arlen and his 19-year-old daughter, Lexi, entered Sharp's Cave in Virginia. It was 3 p.m. and they planned to find a famous waterfall inside the cave system. Arlen and Lexi were inexperienced cavers with no proper training or equipment. They carried basic flashlights instead of proper cave lighting systems. They had no helmets and wore completely wrong clothing for the cold, wet cave. Sharp's Cave was a complex maze of passages, rooms, and dead ends. The cave stretched for miles underground, with multiple levels and chambers. The waterfall they wanted to find wasn't marked on any tourist map. As they moved deeper, their cheap flashlights began to dim quickly. Cave environments drain battery power fast due to humidity and temperature changes. The deeper they went, the more complex the cave became. Side passages branched off in every direction like a confusing puzzle. Hours passed and the passages seemed to multiply around them. Every turn led to another choice of left or right, up or down. They tried to remember their route back, but everything looked the same. By 6 p.m., they were completely lost in the cave system. The cave temperature was a constant 54 degrees, which threatened hypothermia. Their inadequate lights were failing, creating absolute darkness around them. Panic began to set in as they realized their dangerous situation. Arlen tried to stay calm for his daughter, but was fighting growing terror. They had no backup lights, emergency supplies, or way to signal for help. They wandered for hours calling out, but sound travels strangely in caves. Dehydration was setting in and their bodies burned energy trying to stay warm. The psychological stress of being trapped in darkness affected both of them. Above ground, Arlen's two younger children, aged 10 and 16, grew worried. When 11:30 p.m. arrived with no sign of them, the teenagers called 911. The call was escalated to emergency status when they mentioned cave exploration. The emergency triggered a massive rescue response from multiple agencies. Virginia State Police contacted Jennifer Bowl of the National Cave Rescue Commission. They carried powerful LED lights, communication equipment, and medical supplies. But Sharp's Cave was too complex with too many branching passages. After 2 hours of searching, Bowl called for massive reinforcements. By 8:30 a.m., approximately 40 cave rescue specialists converged on the scene. This became one of the largest cave rescue operations in Virginia's history. Teams were assigned different cave sections with communication lines run underground. Around 10 a.m., Christopher Spence and Mystic Miller searched Catfish Hall. Deep in the passage, they discovered two dark figures huddled together. It was Arlen and Lexi after 19 hours trapped in the cave. Both were alive but shaking uncontrollably from hypothermia. Their flashlights had died hours earlier, leaving them in complete darkness. They were dehydrated, exhausted, and terrified, but still breathing. The rescuers immediately shared warm clothing, food, and water. Most importantly, they provided proper cave lights for safe navigation. The journey back to the surface took several more hours of careful guidance. When they emerged into daylight, both suffered from mild hypothermia and dehydration. But they were alive and had no serious injuries from their ordeal. Supat Valley Cave Incident. In June 1997, 33-year-old Nasiruddin and his brother Kathir fled their village in northern Pakistan. The Salakel tribe was in a violent feud, and staying meant certain death. Nasir left behind his wife and 2 young children to escape the bloodshed. The brothers rode through the night, heading for the remote Kohistan region. After hours of riding, they reached Supat Valley with massive glaciers. They needed shelter from strong mountain winds and growing exhaustion. Nasir spotted a dark opening in the glacier wall that looked like a cave. Kathir stayed with the horses while Nasir explored the cave entrance. Inside, the walls glowed with eerie blue light from ancient compressed ice. Nasir moved deeper, looking for a safe place to camp for the night. The floor looked solid with thick blue ice that seemed centuries old. But glacier appearances can be deadly, and the ice was just a thin shell. As Nasir stepped forward, the false floor gave way beneath his feet. He plummeted into a massive crevice that dropped deep into the glacier. After falling over 100 feet, his body slammed into a ledge and he lost consciousness. Above, Kathir heard the crash and found a hole going straight down. He called his brother's name but only heard echoes in response. Kathir ran for help and villagers arrived with ropes and lanterns. They searched for 3 days, but the crevice was too deep and narrow. The glacier began closing the wound and sealing itself shut with new snow. The extreme cold froze Nasir's body almost instantly after impact. The glacier created perfect preservation conditions with no oxygen or moisture. No bacteria could cause decay in the crevice's frozen environment. The cold preserved his skin, clothes, and facial features perfectly. For 28 years, Nasir lay in perfect preservation deep in the ice. His wife waited for news that never came while his children grew up fatherless. Starting in the early 2000s, temperatures in northern Pakistan began rising dramatically. The massive glaciers started melting faster than they ever had before. By 2025, the glacier in Supat Valley had retreated significantly. On August 1st, 2025, Shepherd Omar Khan crossed the melted glacier area. Omar saw something sticking out of the melting ice that looked like a person. It was a man perfectly preserved with his clothes completely intact. He looked like he had just laid down recently, despite decades-old clothing style. Omar found an identity card in the man's pocket reading Nasiruddin. The card was dated from the 1990s, but still perfectly legible after 28 years. Police arrived and records showed Nasir had been reported missing in June 1997. His brother Kathir, now much older, was contacted for the heartbreaking reunion. Time had stood still for Nasir while marching on for everyone else. DNA tests confirmed the identity, though family recognized him immediately.